There's something nobody tells you about the spiritual path, something that sounds almost heretical to say out loud. The more spiritually awake you become, the harder it is to find love. Not because you're broken, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you've seen something most people haven't. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that changes everything about how you relate to others, especially in romance. Welcome. I'm here today to explore one of the most paradoxical and rarely discussed aspects of spiritual growth. The fact that clarity, awakening, and consciousness can actually make romantic love more difficult to find and sustain. And we're going to explore this through the profound wisdom of Joseph Campbell, the mythologist who spent his life studying love, spirituality, and the human journey. Campbell understood something that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. He understood that there's a real tension between spiritual development and romantic partnership. And he didn't shy away from that complexity. Campbell said something that shocked many people. He said, "When people get married because they think it's a long-time love affair, they'll be divorced very soon, because all love affairs end in disappointment. But marriage is a recognition of a spiritual identity. Let that land. All love affairs end in disappointment." That's not pessimism. That's profound insight into the nature of romantic projection and spiritual reality. In this video, we're going to explore 5 reasons why spiritual clarity makes love harder to find. Not to discourage you, but to help you navigate this paradox with wisdom instead of confusion. Because if you're on a spiritual path and struggling with love, you need to understand what's actually happening. You need to know you're not alone, and you need to know there's a path forward. If you're ready to explore the complex relationship between awakening and intimacy, between consciousness and connection, between spiritual clarity and romantic love, stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you understand both spirituality and relationships forever. Who was Joseph Campbell and why he understood this paradox? Before we dive into the 5 reasons, you need to understand why Joseph Campbell's perspective on this is so valuable. Because Campbell wasn't just a scholar studying love from the outside. He lived this paradox himself. Campbell married relatively late in life at age 34 to a woman named Jean Erdman, a dancer and choreographer. And their marriage lasted until his death 49 years later. But Campbell was always honest about the fact that marriage was not a simple love affair. In fact, he said something radical. Marriage is not a love affair. It's an ordeal, not a romantic fantasy, not a fairy tale, an ordeal. That's a man who understood both the spiritual path and the reality of intimate partnership. Campbell spent decades studying mythology, and he discovered that every culture has stories about the tension between spiritual seeking and worldly attachment. The Buddha leaving his wife and child to seek enlightenment, Jesus remaining unmarried, monks and nuns taking vows of celibacy, yogis retreating to caves. There's a pattern here. And the pattern suggests something profound. There's a real tension between spiritual development and romantic entanglement. Not an absolute incompatibility, but a genuine challenge that must be navigated consciously. Campbell studied something called the levels of love in medieval European literature, particularly in the tradition of courtly love and the troubadours. He identified different types of love, and he observed that the highest form, what he called amour, was often presented as being in tension with marriage, with social convention, with ordinary domestic life. He also studied the concept from Hindu philosophy of the 4 stages of life: the student, the householder, the forest dweller, and the renunciate. Notice that the spiritual culmination, the final stage, involves leaving the household behind. There's wisdom in that structure, an acknowledgement that different life stages require different focuses. But Campbell didn't advocate for everyone to become a renunciate. Instead, he explored how to integrate spiritual consciousness with the demands of relationship. And he was brutally honest about how difficult that integration is. He said something I've never forgotten. In marriage, you are not sacrificing yourself to the other person. You are sacrificing yourself to the relationship. And that sacrifice requires a level of consciousness that most people simply don't have when they fall in love. This is why Campbell's perspective is so valuable. He understood both sides of this paradox. He knew the pull of spiritual seeking. He knew the demands of intimate partnership. And he didn't pretend they were easy to reconcile. So when Campbell talks about why spiritual clarity makes love difficult, he's not being cynical. He's being realistic. He's offering hard-won wisdom about one of the most challenging aspects of human existence. Now let's explore exactly why this difficulty exists. Reason 1. You see through projections that others rely on. The first reason spiritual clarity makes love hard to find is fundamental. You begin to see through the projections that create romantic attraction. And once you see through them, the magic that most people call falling in love becomes almost impossible. Let me explain what I mean by projections. Campbell studied Carl Jung's concept of the anima and animus. The anima is the feminine ideal that men carry in their unconscious. The animus is the masculine ideal that women carry in theirs. These are not real people. They're archetypal images, idealized fantasies, projections. And here's what Campbell understood. Most romantic love is actually the projection of these ideals onto another person. You meet someone, and unconsciously you project your anima or animus onto them. They seem perfect. They seem to complete you. They seem like your soulmate. Campbell said it beautifully. Falling in love is the projection of the masculine or feminine ideal, the anima or animus, onto a specific person. And the person you've fallen for is caught, and they fall for you because you represent their ideal. But here's the problem. It's not real. You're not falling in love with an actual person. You're falling in love with your own projection. You're falling in love with an idealized fantasy that you've placed onto another human being. And for most people, this is fine. They don't see it. They don't question it. They ride the wave of romantic intoxication and call it love. And when the projection inevitably fades, when they start seeing the real person behind the fantasy, they call it falling out of love. And they either suffer through the disappointment or they leave and find someone new to project onto. But when you develop spiritual clarity, you start seeing this mechanism. You start noticing when you're projecting. You start catching yourself creating fantasies about someone you barely know. You start recognizing the difference between the real person and the ideal you're overlaying onto them. And once you see this, romantic attraction becomes complicated. Because you can't not see it anymore. You can't just surrender to the projection and enjoy the intoxication. Your awareness won't let you. Campbell talked about this as one of the boldest things you could do. Consciously choose to marry that ideal you've fallen for. Knowing it's a projection, knowing the real work begins when the projection fades. That requires tremendous consciousness. Most people aren't ready for that. But here's where it gets even more complex for spiritually aware people. Not only do you see your own projections, you start seeing when others are projecting onto you. And that becomes deeply uncomfortable. Someone is attracted to you, but you can feel that they're not actually seeing you. They're seeing their fantasy. They're in love with an idea of you, not the reality. And if you have spiritual clarity, you can't reciprocate that. You can't pretend to be the fantasy they've created. It feels dishonest. It feels like a betrayal of your authentic self. So you find yourself in this impossible position. Most romantic attraction is based on projection, but you can't engage with projection authentically. You're stuck between a world where everyone is falling in love with fantasies and your own need for real conscious connection. Campbell understood this deeply. He said that the real work of relationship begins after the projection fades. He called marriage an ordeal precisely because it requires you to face the gap between the ideal and the real, to love the actual person, not the fantasy. But most people never signed up for that. They signed up for the fantasy. And when the fantasy ends, so does their commitment. So here you are, spiritually clear enough to see through projections, looking for someone else who's also clear enough to see through them. And that person is rare, because most people are still living in the world of romantic fantasy, still chasing the high of projection, still believing in soulmates who will complete them. Your clarity has made you incompatible with the romantic marketplace. You're looking for something real in a world built on illusions, and that makes love incredibly hard to find. Reason 2, you're less willing to compromise your path. The second reason spiritual clarity makes love difficult is more practical but equally challenging. When you've found your path, when you've discovered your bliss, as Campbell would say, you become far less willing to compromise it for relationship. And relationships demand compromise. Campbell's most famous teaching is, follow your bliss, and he meant it literally. He said if you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. But here's what happens when you actually do this. Your life becomes organized around your spiritual path, your purpose, your calling, and that path often doesn't leave much room for the demands of romantic partnership. Let me be specific. Maybe you've discovered that you need significant time alone for meditation, contemplation, or creative work. Maybe you've found that your spiritual practice requires certain disciplines, certain rhythms, certain priorities. Maybe you've realized that your calling demands mobility, or solitude, or unconventional choices, and then you meet someone, and they want what most people want from relationship. Time together, attention, shared activities, compromise on decisions, merging of lives, and you feel the tension immediately. If you say yes to this relationship, you'll have to say no to aspects of your path. You'll have to compromise practices that feed your soul. You'll have to adjust rhythms that support your growth. You'll have to accommodate another person's needs in ways that might dilute your spiritual focus. Campbell was honest about this. He spent those formative 5 years in Woodstock in solitude, reading 8 to 9 hours a day. That was his bliss. That was his path. Could he have done that while in a demanding relationship? Probably not. He said something crucial. Successful marriage is leading innovative lives together, being open, non-programmed. It's a free fall. How you handle each new thing as it comes along. Notice that language. Leading innovative lives together. That's very different from one person sacrificing their path for domestic harmony. It requires both people to be on their own paths and to somehow integrate those paths together. And that's extraordinarily rare. Most relationships operate on an implicit contract of compromise. I'll give up some of what I want. You'll give up some of what you want. And together we'll create a shared life that's some average of our individual desires. But when you have spiritual clarity, that contract feels suffocating. Because you're not just giving up preferences or conveniences. You're being asked to compromise your connection to what makes you feel most alive. Your bliss, as Campbell called it, and here's the hard truth, most people don't understand this. They think you're being selfish. They think you're not committed. They think you're not willing to do the work of relationship. But you're not being selfish. You're protecting something sacred. You've found what Campbell spent his entire life trying to help others find. A sense of connection to your own deepest purpose. And you've learned that compromising that connection is a betrayal of your soul. Campbell said it explicitly. I do not think that you are married unless your relationship to your spouse is the primary consideration in your life. That's a huge demand, and if your spiritual path is your primary consideration, then by Campbell's own definition, you're not available for marriage. Not in the way most people understand it. This is the paradox. The more committed you are to your spiritual path, the less available you are for the kind of all-consuming romantic partnership that most people seek. You're not willing to make another person the center of your universe because you've already found your center. And it's not in another person. It's in your connection to something transcendent. So you're looking for someone rare, someone who also has their own path, someone who doesn't need you to complete them because they're already complete. Someone who can walk beside you without demanding that you abandon your bliss for domestic convenience. And that person is hard to find because most people seeking relationship are seeking completion. They're seeking someone to fill their emptiness. They're seeking someone to organize their life around. But you don't need completion. You need companionship on the path. And those are very different things. Your spiritual clarity has made you incompatible with conventional relationship. And that makes love incredibly difficult to find. Reason 3. You've transcended the ego needs that fuel most relationships. The third reason spiritual clarity makes love difficult cuts even deeper. You've begun to transcend the ego needs that actually fuel most romantic relationships. And without those needs, you lose much of the motivation to pursue partnership in the first place. Let me be provocative here. What do most people actually want from romantic relationships? If we're brutally honest, it's ego gratification. They want to feel desired. They want to feel chosen. They want to feel special. They want validation. They want security. They want someone to reflect back to them that they're worthy, attractive, successful enough. Campbell understood this. He talked about different levels of love. And he was clear that much of what we call love is actually ego-based need. It's what he would distinguish from true spiritual love or compassion. He said something profound. Love without a sense of responsibility is not love. It's taking possession. Are you trying to possess somebody? Or are you in a relationship Most romance is about possession disguised as love. I want you to be mine. I want you to choose me. I want you to make me feel complete. That's not love. That's ego trying to fill its emptiness through another person. But when you develop spiritual clarity, you start seeing this. You start noticing your own ego needs. You start catching yourself seeking validation through another person's attraction. You start recognizing when you're trying to use relationship to feel better about yourself. And as you do spiritual work, those needs begin to dissolve. Not all at once, but gradually. You find validation within. You find security in your connection to something greater than yourself. You find your sense of worth, not in being chosen by another, but in your own spiritual practice, your own growth, your own path. And this is beautiful. It's liberation. But it also removes much of the fuel that drives romantic pursuit. Think about it. Why do people pursue romantic partners with such intensity? Why do they suffer through heartbreak and rejection and keep trying? Because they need something from partnership. They need that validation. They need that security. They need that sense of being special to someone. But when those needs fall away, so does much of the motivation. You're fine alone. You're complete in yourself. You don't need another person to feel whole. And while that's spiritually mature, it's romantically problematic, because now you're only interested in partnership if it's actually enhancing your life, not filling a hole. You're only interested if you meet someone who's also complete in themselves. You're only interested in a relationship between two whole people, not two halves trying to make a whole. And again, that kind of relationship is rare, because most people in the romantic marketplace are there precisely because they're not complete. They're seeking completion. They're seeking someone to need and someone who needs them. Campbell talked about this when he distinguished between different types of love. He talked about agape, universal, compassionate love, and he talked about ama, intense personal love. And he observed that amor often contains elements of need, of incompleteness, of ego seeking fulfillment through another. He wasn't saying that's wrong. He was saying it's human. It's part of the journey. But here's the challenge. Once you've moved beyond that stage spiritually, you're no longer compatible with people still in it. You're not interested in being someone's savior. You're not interested in being someone's completion. You're not interested in drama fueled by ego needs and insecurities. You're not interested in the games people play to feel wanted and valued, and that eliminates most of the romantic marketplace. Because let's be honest, most dating is ego theater. It's performance designed to trigger another person's attraction, which is itself an ego-based response. But you can't engage in that theater anymore. Your spiritual clarity won't allow it. You can't pretend to be less than you are to make someone comfortable. You can't play games to trigger attraction. You can't manipulate or strategize your way into connection. You can only show up authentically as you are, complete in yourself. And that's either deeply attractive to someone also at that level, or it's confusing and off-putting to someone still operating from ego need. So your pool shrinks dramatically. You're looking for another person who's also done the work, another person who's also moved beyond using relationship for ego gratification, another person who's also spiritually mature enough to engage in conscious partnership. And Campbell would tell you, those people exist, but they're rare. And the more clear you become, the rarer your match becomes. That's the price of spiritual development, and it's a price that makes love genuinely difficult to find. Reason 4, you value truth over harmony. The fourth reason spiritual clarity makes love hard is about priorities. Spiritual development teaches you to value truth above comfort, authenticity above harmony. But most relationships are built on the opposite priority, and that fundamental incompatibility creates constant friction. Campbell talked about this in the context of what makes relationships work. He said, if you don't have the maturity to control your compulsive passions, it seems to me that you are ineligible for marriage. But he also said something equally challenging. He said that marriage requires you to sacrifice your ego to the relationship, and that sacrifice involves choosing the harmony of the relationship over your individual ego needs. Here's the tension. Spiritual development trains you to see truth clearly, to name reality accurately, to not lie to yourself or others, to speak what needs to be spoken, to honor your authentic experience even when it's uncomfortable. But relationships, especially long-term partnerships, often require you to prioritize harmony over truth, to not say the thing that will hurt, to smooth over differences, to let some things go unspoken, to compromise your authentic response for the sake of peace. And when you have spiritual clarity, this becomes almost impossible. You can feel when you're betraying yourself for harmony. You can feel when you're swallowing truth to keep things comfortable. You can feel when you're participating in a polite fiction to avoid conflict, and it feels wrong. It feels like everything your spiritual practice has taught you not to do. It feels like you're going backwards, choosing comfort over consciousness, choosing illusion over reality. Campbell understood this paradox. He talked about marriage as an ordeal, precisely because it requires this constant navigation between individual truth and relational harmony. He said, in marriage, you are sacrificing yourself to the relationship. But what if your spiritual path has taught you never to sacrifice your truth? What if your practice is built on radical honesty, on clear seeing, on speaking what is real? Then you're bringing that consciousness into a structure, marriage, that often requires the opposite. Let me give you a concrete example. Your partner does something that hurts you. Most relationship advice says, communicate clearly, express your feelings, work through it together. But your spiritual clarity shows you something more complex. You see that your hurt is partially coming from your own expectations and attachments. You see that your partner was acting from their own conditioning and pain. You see the whole situation with compassion and understanding. But you also see the truth of what happened. You see the pattern. You see the unconsciousness, and now you have a choice. Do you speak that truth clearly, even though it might create conflict? Do you call out the pattern, even though your partner might become defensive? Do you insist on consciousness, even though it's easier to just let it go and maintain harmony? Most people in relationship choose harmony. They let it go. They smooth it over. They prioritize peace over truth. And maybe that's wise in a certain way. Maybe that's what makes relationships sustainable. But when you have spiritual clarity, you can't do that without feeling like you're betraying yourself. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't pretend the pattern isn't there. You can't choose unconsciousness for the sake of convenience. So you speak the truth. And your partner feels attacked. They feel like you're being too intense, too analytical, too unforgiving. They feel like you can't just relax and be in love. They feel like your spiritual clarity is making everything harder than it needs to be, and they're not wrong. Your clarity is making things harder because you're not willing to participate in the comfortable illusions that most relationships are built on. The illusion that everything is fine when it's not. The illusion that patterns don't matter if we love each other. The illusion that we can avoid deep work by just being nice to each other. Campbell would say, this is the ordeal. This is the sacrifice. But he'd also be honest that not everyone is willing to make it. Not everyone wants a relationship built on truth. Most people want a relationship built on comfort, on security, on not having to look too deeply at themselves or each other. So you're seeking someone rare again, someone who values truth as much as you do, someone who's willing to have the hard conversations, someone who's willing to look at patterns and conditioning and unconsciousness, someone who's willing to choose growth over comfort. And that person is hard to find, because most people seeking relationship are seeking refuge. They want partnership to be the place where they don't have to work so hard, where they can relax, where they can be accepted as they are without constant challenge to grow. But your spiritual clarity has made you incompatible with that kind of relationship. You can't offer refuge from consciousness. You can only offer companionship in consciousness. And that's a much more demanding invitation, one that very few people are ready to accept. Reason 5. You see relationship as spiritual practice, not escape from spirituality. The fifth and final reason spiritual clarity makes love difficult to find is perhaps the most profound. You've come to see relationship itself as spiritual practice, as another arena for consciousness and growth. But most people see relationship as an escape from the demands of consciousness, as a place to finally relax and just be human, and those two visions are fundamentally incompatible. Campbell said something that captures this perfectly. Marriage is not a simple love affair, it's an ordeal. It is a religious exercise, a sacrament, the grace of participating in another life. A religious exercise. A sacrament. Let that land. Campbell saw marriage as a spiritual practice, as demanding and transformative as any monastic discipline. That's a radically different view from how most people understand romantic partnership. Most people see falling in love as the end of work. They've been working on themselves, they've been lonely, they've been struggling, and finally they meet someone. And now they can stop working. Now they can just enjoy. Now they can relax into being loved and accepted. But Campbell is saying no. The work is just beginning. The real spiritual challenge starts now, because now you have to maintain consciousness while dealing with another person's unconsciousness. Now you have to see your own patterns reflected back at you daily. Now you have to choose love over ego over and over. In small moments and large ones, this is what he meant by ordeal. Not suffering for its own sake, but the demanding practice of staying conscious in the most challenging arena of human life, intimate partnership. When you have spiritual clarity, you understand this. You know that relationship will bring up everything in you that hasn't been healed. You know it will trigger every attachment, every fear, every insecurity. You know it will demand more consciousness than almost anything else in life, and you're prepared for that. In fact, you welcome it. You see relationship as the ultimate yoga, the ultimate practice, a chance to embody your spiritual understanding in the most challenging context possible. But here's the problem. Most people don't see it that way at all. They see relationship as the reward for all that hard spiritual work. They see partnership as the place where they finally get to stop being so conscious and just be human, be messy, be comfortable. Campbell captured this tension beautifully when he talked about different types of love. He distinguished between romantic love, which seeks ecstasy and escape, and mature love, which recognizes spiritual identity and requires responsibility. He said, when people get married because they think it's a long-time love affair, they'll be divorced very soon because all love affairs end in disappointment. But marriage is a recognition of a spiritual identity. Most people marry seeking the love affair, the romance, the passion, the intoxication. They want relationship to be an escape from ordinary consciousness into something transcendent. But you, with your spiritual clarity, understand that real transcendence comes through consciousness, not escape from it. You understand that the ecstasy they're seeking is temporary, a biochemical high that inevitably fades. And when it fades, what's left is the real work. So you're looking for something different than what most people seek. You're not looking for an escape. You're looking for a partner in practice. Someone who understands that love is not the end of spiritual work, but potentially the most demanding form of it. Campbell said it explicitly. Successful marriage is leading innovative lives together. Being open, non-programmed. It's a free fall. How you handle each new thing as it comes along. Notice that? Free fall, not security, not comfort. Not finally arriving somewhere safe. Free fall, constant improvisation, constant consciousness. Constant choice to remain open rather than closed, conscious rather than automatic. That's the kind of relationship you're ready for. That's what your spiritual clarity has prepared you for. Partnership as crucible. Partnership as mirror. Partnership as practice. But how many people actually want that? How many people are seeking relationship as spiritual practice rather than spiritual escape? Very few. Because it's demanding. Because it requires you to stay awake when you want to fall asleep. Because it requires you to see your own unconsciousness reflected in another person daily. Because it requires you to keep choosing love when ego wants to choose defense, attack, withdrawal. Campbell understood this deeply. He said, in marriage, you are not sacrificing yourself to the other person. You are sacrificing yourself to the relationship, to the unity, to something greater than both individuals. That's a spiritual understanding of partnership, and it requires spiritual maturity to even comprehend, let alone live. So you're seeking someone who sees relationship the way you do, not as escape from the demands of consciousness, but as perhaps the highest form of spiritual practice available to humans. Someone who's willing to use partnership as a mirror for their own unconsciousness. Someone who's willing to keep choosing love over ego, presence over pattern, consciousness over comfort. And that person is extraordinarily rare, because most people seeking love are seeking exactly the opposite. They're seeking comfort after the demands of consciousness. They're seeking a place to finally relax their spiritual vigilance. They're seeking someone who will love them despite their unconsciousness, not someone who will compassionately reflect it back to them. Your spiritual clarity has made you ready for sacred partnership. But most of the world is seeking something entirely different. And that fundamental misalignment makes love genuinely difficult to find. Integration, the paradox you must navigate. So let's bring all 5 reasons together. Let's see the full picture of why spiritual clarity makes love so challenging to find. 1. You see through the projections that create romantic attraction. You can't fall in love the way most people do because you see the mechanism too clearly. 2. You're less willing to compromise your spiritual path. You've found your bliss, and you're not willing to sacrifice it for conventional partnership. 3. You've transcended the ego needs that fuel most relationships. You don't need validation, completion, or security from another person. And without those needs, you lack much of the motivation that drives romantic pursuit. 4. You value truth over harmony. You're not willing to choose comfortable illusions over honest reality. And most relationships are built on exactly those comfortable illusions. 5. You see relationship as spiritual practice, not escape from spirituality. But most people seek partnership as refuge from the demands of consciousness, not as an arena for more consciousness. Each of these alone would make love challenging. Together, they create a genuine paradox. The more spiritually developed you become, the more incompatible you become with conventional relationship. The clearer you see, the harder it is to find someone who sees as clearly. So what do you do with this? Campbell offers some guidance, though it's not simple or comfortable. He says, the question is, can I open myself to compassion? Compassion for me is just what the word says. It is suffering with. It is an immediate participation in the suffering of another to such a degree that you forget yourself and your own safety and spontaneously do what's necessary. Notice what he's pointing to. Not romantic love as ego fulfillment, not partnership as mutual completion, but compassion, suffering with, participating in another's life so deeply that you forget your own separate self. That's a spiritual understanding of love. And it's available even when romantic projection isn't, even when ego needs have dissolved, even when you see too clearly to fall into comfortable illusions. Campbell also says something else crucial. He distinguishes between the love affair and the marriage. The love affair, the romantic intoxication that ends. It always ends, he says. But marriage, understood as a recognition of spiritual identity, that can endure. What does that mean practically? It means don't expect relationship to provide the ecstasy of projection forever. That's not what's available. But what is available is something deeper, a recognition. A sense that this other person is, in some essential way, part of you. Not because they complete you, but because you recognize in them the same spiritual essence you recognize in yourself. Campbell calls this seeing the God in the other. Not the idealized projection, but the divine spark. The same consciousness looking out of different eyes. When you can see that, when you can love from that recognition, then relationship becomes possible again. But it's a different kind of love. More spacious, less needy, more conscious, less intoxicated. He also acknowledges that this kind of love is rare. He talks about it as the highest order of love. And he's honest that most people never reach it because they're still stuck in the earlier stages, still seeking completion, still chasing projection. But for those who have spiritual clarity, there's no going back to those earlier stages. You can only move forward, which means accepting that love, when you find it, will look different than what most people experience. It will be more conscious, more challenging, more demanding of your spiritual maturity. And it also means accepting that you might not find it. Campbell spent years in solitude before marrying. He was willing to be alone if that's what following his bliss required. And paradoxically, that willingness to be alone is what makes conscious partnership possible. Because you're no longer seeking from need. You're no longer compromising your truth for companionship. You're complete in yourself. And if you meet another person who's also complete, who also sees clearly, who also values truth and consciousness, then something beautiful can happen. Not a love affair that will inevitably disappoint, but a spiritual partnership, a recognition, a commitment to walk together as long as the path requires. That's what's available on the other side of spiritual clarity. Not less love, but a different kind of love. Harder to find, yes, but infinitely more real when you do. Conclusion: the path forward, so here you are. Spiritually awake in a world that's still dreaming. Conscious in a romantic marketplace built on unconsciousness. Seeing clearly in a culture that celebrates beautiful illusions. And you're wondering, Am I destined to be alone? Has my spiritual development made me incompatible with partnership? Is the price of awakening the loss of romantic love? Campbell would tell you, maybe, but not necessarily. It depends on what you're seeking. If you're seeking romantic intoxication, the kind of falling in love that most songs and movies celebrate, then yes, spiritual clarity has probably made that unavailable to you. You see through it now. You can't unsee what you've seen. But if you're seeking something deeper, something more real, then spiritual clarity hasn't closed doors. It's just redirected you toward a different door, one that fewer people are seeking, one that requires more consciousness to even recognize, let alone walk through. Campbell says, follow your bliss. And if your bliss is spiritual development, consciousness, truth, then follow that. Don't compromise it for conventional relationship. Don't sacrifice your path to fit into someone else's vision of partnership. But also stay open, stay available. Not desperately seeking, but genuinely open. Because somewhere there's another person who's also done the work, who's also developed clarity, who's also willing to engage in relationship as spiritual practice rather than spiritual escape. And if you meet that person, if you recognize each other, then what's possible is something most people never experience. Not a love affair that will inevitably disappoint, but a sacred partnership. A joining of two complete individuals in service of something greater than both. Campbell calls this a spiritual identity. You recognize in the other what you've found in yourself. The divine, the consciousness, the essence beyond personality and ego. And you commit to honoring that recognition, to protecting it, to serving it. That's the love available on the other side of spiritual clarity. Harder to find, yes, but infinitely more valuable when you do. So don't despair that spiritual clarity has made love difficult. It has, that's true. But it's also made real love possible. The kind of love that doesn't depend on projection or ego needs or comfortable illusions. The kind of love that can endure because it's built on recognition of something eternal, not temporary romantic intoxication. Campbell's advice is clear. Follow your bliss. Don't compromise your path. Stay conscious. And trust that if partnership is meant to be part of your journey, it will reveal itself. Not as an escape from your spiritual work, but as the continuation of it in the most challenging and potentially rewarding form possible. The person who can meet you in that space exists. But they're rare. As rare as you are, and finding each other requires patience, trust, and an unwillingness to settle for anything less than the real thing. Your spiritual clarity hasn't made you unlovable. It's made you ready for a kind of love that most people never even conceive of. A love built on consciousness rather than unconsciousness, on truth rather than illusion, on recognition rather than projection. That's the path forward. Not back to the comfortable illusions you've outgrown, but forward into the unknown, trusting that the clarity that's made love difficult has also made real love possible. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work of spiritual development, even when it makes life more complicated. Thank you for being willing to see clearly, even when seeing clearly is lonely. The love you're seeking exists, but it exists on the other side of patience, on the other side of non-compromise, on the other side of trusting your path even when it feels lonely. Campbell spent years alone before finding his partner. And those years weren't wasted. They were necessary. They were the forge in which he developed the clarity and strength to engage in conscious partnership when the time came. Your solitude isn't failure. It's preparation. Your inability to settle for unconscious relationship isn't a problem. It's integrity. Your spiritual clarity hasn't made you broken. It's made you ready for something most people will never experience. So keep walking your path. Keep following your bliss. Keep developing your consciousness. And trust that if sacred partnership is part of your journey, the universe will conspire to bring you together with someone who's also ready for it. But also know this: you don't need partnership to be complete. You don't need romantic love to validate your spiritual journey. You're already whole. You're already on your path. You're already living the life you're meant to live. And if love comes, it will be an enhancement, not a completion. A companionship, not a salvation. A practice, not an escape. And that's exactly as it should be. Campbell reminds us that the privilege of a lifetime is being who you really are, not who someone else needs you to be, not who conventional relationship demands you become, but who you actually are in all your conscious, clear seeing, spiritually developed reality. And when you meet someone who loves you for that, who meets you in that, who joins you in that, then you'll know you found something rare and precious. Not the love affair that the world celebrates and that inevitably disappoints, but the spiritual partnership that endures because it's built on something real. That's worth waiting for. That's worth the loneliness. That's worth refusing to compromise your clarity for comfortable illusion. Your spiritual development hasn't made love impossible. It's made mediocre love impossible. And that's a gift even when it doesn't feel like one. So trust your path. Honor your clarity. Stay open to sacred partnership. But don't sacrifice your consciousness seeking it, because the person worthy of you will love you precisely for that consciousness, not despite it. And until that person appears, you have your bliss. You have your practice. You have your path. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Campbell's final wisdom on this is simple but profound. He says, "We're not on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves. But in doing that, you save the world. Save yourself first. Follow your bliss. Develop your consciousness. Live your truth. And in doing so, you become the kind of person capable of sacred partnership, not needing it, but ready for it if it comes." That's the resolution of the paradox. Spiritual clarity makes conventional love hard to find, but it makes sacred love possible. And sacred love, when you find it, is worth all the loneliness, all the waiting, all the refusing to settle. You're not alone in this struggle. Every spiritually awakening person faces it, the gap between their clarity and the world's comfortable illusions, the loneliness of seeing what others don't yet see, the challenge of staying true to their path when compromise seems so much easier. But you're also not without guidance. Campbell spent his life mapping this territory. And his message is clear. Don't retreat. Don't compromise. Don't sacrifice your spiritual development for temporary comfort. Follow your bliss. Trust your path. And know that the love meant for you, if it's meant for you, will find you. Not when you're seeking desperately. Not when you're compromising your truth. But when you're fully aligned with who you really are. And when that love comes, you'll recognize it. Not by the intoxication of projection. Not by the fulfillment of ego needs, but by the quiet recognition of spiritual identity. The sense of meeting another consciousness as clear as your own. The feeling of coming home, not to another person, but to a shared recognition of the divine. That's what's waiting on the other side of your spiritual clarity. Not easier love, but real love, and that makes all the difficulty worth it. Now go, live your path, follow your bliss, stay conscious, and trust that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Your spiritual clarity is not a curse, it's a gift, and the right person will recognize that gift for exactly what it is. Thank you for walking this path. Thank you for refusing to settle. Thank you for having the courage to stay conscious, even when unconsciousness seems so much more comfortable. The world needs people like you, people who refuse to participate in comfortable illusions, people who insist on truth even when it's lonely, people who live from spiritual clarity even when it makes everything harder. You're exactly where you need to be, and love, when it's meant to find you, will meet you there. Not before, not by compromise, but in perfect timing. Trust that. Trust your path, trust your clarity, and most of all, trust that you're not alone. You're part of a lineage of conscious seekers, of clear-seeing humans, of people who chose truth over comfort, awareness over illusion, spiritual development over social approval. Campbell was one of those people, and he's showing you the way. Not an easy way, but a real way, the only way that leads to something worth having. Follow it, and trust where it leads. Your sacred partnership, if it's meant to be, is already on its way to you, and it's worth every moment of lonely clarity you've endured to get here.